Hello, welcome to episode 21 of the Wait For It Seattle podcast. On this edition, we welcome Joe Knight, the executive director of Dawgs Unleashed. I chat with Joe and we talk about his new position with the University of Washington. We talk about the NIL happenings, the transfer portal, and much more. I think you'll enjoy this one. Without further ado, here's my interview with Joe Knight. All right. I'm here with Joe Knight. Um, Now, we'll tell you why we're interviewing Joe Knight, but let me give you a little of his storied athletic career. Joe Knight is a graduate of the University of Washington, a two-sport athlete, played on the basketball team, also participated in track and field. Um, and we know each other because we were both Seattle Prep Panthers. Although Joe transferred, he hit the portal in high school and went to Roosevelt before he proceeded to continue his athletic career in college. Joe, how are you doing? And was that an accurate description of your athletic career?
Storied was a nice way to put it. But Kev, I'm great. Thanks for having me on, man. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. I honestly don't know when the last time we spoke. I spent some time with you on the bench at Seattle Prep. Not that you were a bench warmer your entire career, but we did spend some time. I was keeping stats, and you were, I think, maybe a sophomore on varsity. And we bonded. So it's good to see you.
It's good to
Uh,
see you. Those days were legendary. I wish Els was here because that was a fun
yes,
group
yeah.
and fun time.
Um, okay, you were at Pomona Pitzer, you played some college ball there, then you transferred up to UW. Um, what was the thought process behind that? And I mean, it's been some time since that happened. You were like an old school transfer, right? So this was back before whatever the portal is and whatever this exists right now.
Yeah, I probably would have gone to UW out of high school. Had my grades been stellar enough to get
Yes.
into what is a uber competitive in-state school.
Yeah.
But I didn't pick up high jump until spring of my senior high school season. And did that, was halfway decent at it, but was already committed to go down to Claremont and play D3 hoops, which was just so much fun at an awesome school. Did that, high jumped, and frankly loved it, but found out I was, had the potential to jump over and be a Husky and go pursue a degree at UW and do track along the way. And, high jump was sort of my meal ticket. So
Yeah.
made the decision to transfer and ended up high jumping my sophomore and junior years at the UW. Had just like an unbelievably fun time doing it. And then my senior year, I actually was asked by Coach Romar at the time to walk on the men's hoops team. So did that just for my senior year. I was familiar to the bench from my sophomore year at prep, but I was the end of the bench for the 2015, 2016 Huskies men's basketball team. But it was, I mean, truly the most fun thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, so you say that with a smile on your face. And I was actually, I mean, you probably know this, but I was a manager at LMU.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get to know the walk-ons pretty well. And of course, the scholarship players, but like no one really has any idea that you may see like 8 to 9 players play during the game, but like during the practices, the walk-ons are playing just as much as everyone else, right? Like you know all the tendencies of all the players. Your job is to play the scout on play your part. We had Mikey Phillips on. He was, of course, playing Brittany Griner. I'm sure you've played other, maybe not Brittany Griner, but other players, right? So, what was that walk-on experience like for that 1 year? Did you learn anything about yourself, about, Coach Romar? I'm just interested to hear about what that experience was like.
Yeah, I will just say anecdotally, the best day of practice I had as a Husky was, I don't know, maybe 2 days before we played Utah, and I was Jacob Pirtle on the scout team. and just played out of my mind. And
Yeah.
fortunately, gave, I think, a good picture of what was to come, and we, I think, got our butts kicked by Utah. But
Yeah.
it
Who are the
was
big guys on UW on the roster at that time?
so my senior year, we were the second youngest team in Division I basketball. Andrew Andrews was a fifth-year senior, good buddy of mine, and then DeJounte Murray, Marquise Chris, Matisse Thybulle, Noah Dickerson, Dominic Green,
Oh
Devin
man.
Caruso. We just were David Crisp. We just were
Yeah.
chock full of
Young
true
guys.
freshmen.
Yeah.
And obviously a ton of what became NBA talent. So
Yeah.
it was so much fun, Kev. I mean, being a lifelong Husky like you,
Yeah.
it just and being a lifelong fan of Lorenzo Romar. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just so cool to be a part of it. And I tell people this all the time, but I mean, I was the 15th guy on a 15-man roster, and you wouldn't have known it the way that Romar invested in me as a person, and
Yeah.
as the little bit of a player that I was. He just was awesome. The team was awesome. I mean, obviously, professionally, I still am very close to Husky basketball players, but I
Yeah.
still keep in touch with those guys as friends.
Yeah.
It's just so cool to be part of that um, brotherhood, so to speak, that is
Yeah.
Husky basketball. It was, like I said, it was the most fun experience of my life. I'd say what I learned about myself. I mean, it was humbling as a basketball player. You go from like a Roosevelt where you think you're hot shit, or you go from
Yeah.
like a Pomona
Yeah.
Pitzer where you
Yeah.
kind of feel the same. And then at UW, it was, I'm getting my butt kicked by Marquise Chris and Malik Dime every day. And I mean, it was eye opening to, my gosh, this just is another level of competition.
Yeah.
But and it was hard, man, every day.
Yeah.
But it was just so much fun. So I,
Yeah.
I, I can't speak highly enough about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great that you have a smile on your face describing the experience because I ultimately think that, at least college athletics, the people that don't go on, to play professionally, if they could have a valuable experience like you did, then that's ultimately what matters, right? Like, follow a lot of the guys that, when I was a manager, went through LMU's program and they felt the same way. They have good memories, maybe not as many wins as UW, but just solid good memories. And I think that to be able to have that and have that also in high school, hopefully, most people say it was worth it. Um,
Totally, totally.
so after you graduated from UW, you took a role on at SU, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So the reason why we have you on is like 2 weeks ago, you were named the executive director of what is called Dawgs Unleashed, and we will get into that. But before we get into what that is, I do want to get a sense of, what were you doing beforehand? How did you get to this point where you were, you're leading this important part of UW athletics? So what happened at SU? What were you doing? How did you get into it? And yeah, let us know a little bit about that.
Yeah, in 2017, shortly after I graduated from the U, I had an inkling I wanted to get into college athletics, like the quote unquote front office side of things. I
Yeah.
didn't know, maybe I sell tickets, maybe I work in student athlete development. I was introduced to Shani Fink, who was and is still the AD at Seattle U, and she said, "Hey, we've got this sort of temporary opening in corporate sponsorships where we lost someone, we need to hire someone more permanently, with some experience. But if you want to come in and essentially hold down the fort in the meantime, we'd love to have you." So I did that, and I inherited at Seattle U a book of sponsorships like Alaska, Coca-Cola. A little insight into the Adidas relationship, and then like the Pagliacci Pizza and Zoka Coffees
Yeah.
of the world. And really, I just was supposed to keep things alive. But I don't know if I would say I went rogue. I think Shaney kind of did empower me to make it my own. I started to try and solicit new partnerships, and I
Yeah.
really found a groove in it. And not too long after, Shaney said, "Okay, this is your job. You're running with this." So
Yeah.
headed up corporate sponsorships for the Red Hawks at Seattle U, and all the while, I'm starting to work with some of the really highest level stakeholders for Seattle U athletics, be it through the sponsorship relationships, also donor relationships, and then I really saw a path of, hey, if I want to really stick it out in this college athletic things and rise to position of leadership, the development, the fundraising route is probably the best way to get there. So, with Shaney's blessing, I sort of pivoted over, still managed the corporate sponsorships, but pivoted into a development role for them, was a development officer, eventually became the assistant AD for development, which was the final role I had
Yeah.
with the Red Hawks. And my role, I was just in charge of donor relationships, annual solicitations, major giving, and just got the full scope into what it looks like to fundraise for a Division I athletic department. Now, obviously, different than a UW, Seattle U does not have football. It's a non-football Division I university. But I mean, it's awesome to be at a school that kind of has that startup feel and
Yeah.
prioritizes basketball and the soccers. And
Yeah.
I just can't speak highly enough to Shane Finn,
Yeah.
to sit there, and to my time at Seattle U.
Yeah, so that's super interesting, and I want to kind of dig in on that aspect since we have you. And the other interesting thing is this was pre-NIL era. So I don't know, and I'd be interested to know if you think that there are more pressures and there's more of a focus on a position like yours than there might have been pre-NIL. But uh, I went to LMU and I covered the athletic department for a long time, and Seattle U's joining the WCC now. Um, and everyone was kind of obsessed with Gonzaga, right? Because Gonzaga, for a school like SU or a school like LMU, they're kind of the model, right? Like if basketball is a central thing and you want basketball to kind of, for lack of a better term, feed the other sports, right? And that's not even to say maybe basketball doesn't even turn a profit. I don't know the finances of each school. It's even harder with the private universities. But um, you know, do you think Gonzaga is just they got lucky with the coach, then they caught fire, and it was just the right circumstances, or do you think that a school like LMU, a school like Seattle U, or maybe like a Pepperdine, like they if they struck the right chord that they could replicate Gonzaga, or is Gonzaga just too big of a unicorn to replicate? Interesting.
I think on one hand, Gonzaga is totally a unicorn. I mean, they caught lightning in a bottle in the best way. When I was at Seattle U, I hated the comparison to like we want to be Gonzaga because I just
Yeah.
I'm a Husky. I don't like Gonzaga.
Yeah.
Uh, I remember Shaney as I got really cooking at Seattle U saying every day we need to be thinking about two things. One, how do we get to the WCC? Two, how do we build an on-campus event center? Seattle U currently plays at the Red Hawk Center. It's
Yeah.
999 seats. It's rocking when it's rocking, but that's untenable for a Division I basketball
Yeah.
program. So they've accomplished step one, which is get into the WCC. I think Gonzaga finally, made some concessions and allowed for that.
Which is
Um,
ironic because now they're leaving, right?
yeah, I think that I'm speculating, but I
Yeah.
imagine that was part of it. And now I know Seattle U.S. lines in the fire for potentially an on-campus event center, but
Yeah.
I think we also, when I was at Seattle U, we looked at Georgetown, we looked at St. John's as in-city metro hub Jesuit schools
That's
without
interesting.
football that in their own way caught fire with basketball. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be. I almost would be more surprised if in my lifetime Seattle U doesn't. And maybe it's not going to the freaking national championship in basketball,
Yeah.
but like I would be more surprised if in my lifetime Seattle U is not at least somewhat back to basketball prominence. Because back in the
Yeah.
50s and 60s, I mean
Yeah.
Elgin Baylor, the O'Brien
Yeah.
twins, they
Yeah.
had it on they had it on Capitol Hill. So
Yeah. Yeah. I
it's
totally.
so cyclical. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's so interesting that you say that. I mean, there's a lot of WCC programs. The USF is another example that's kind of like in the city that had a lot of success, right? And so it's not that it's not impossible, and uh, it's really hard to say where things are going, especially in the basketball world. I mean,
Yeah.
football dominates the conversation, but just the portal and the NIL and a lot of other things that are happening with the house settlement incoming. There's all these different things that, maybe it's not so much that it becomes big versus small, because opportunities for these smaller schools have surely opened up because of the influx of money that's happening. Who knows? I don't know. And maybe that's one of the things we're going to be talking about for the next 20 years on this podcast or however long we last. So, thanks for your insight on that and your time at SU. Um, so then you move to UW. You end up back, I guess, home, I'd say, and you start at the athletic department. And then if you could just let us know, like, where did you start out as? When was the timing of all of this? You were at SU for 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, I was SU almost 4 years, and
Okay.
then I always somewhat intentionally kept in touch with folks at UW, and I always knew I was a Husky. I wanted to be there. I looked at Husky football and Husky hoops and that level, and once I really got my feet wet in fundraising, in advancement work, at a university nearby, I could only imagine how awesome it would be to be at a UW or at the
Yeah.
UW.
Yeah.
So um, I eventually a job came up on my radar. It's called a major gift officer role. So essentially, what I was doing at Seattle U, serving as a development officer, fundraising. And I jumped on it and was lucky enough, fortunate enough to get it, and have been in that role, fundraising specifically for Husky athletics for the last 3 years. So this will be my first time making a move within the UW.
Yeah. And so did that mirror some of the stuff you were doing at SU near the end, or was it just a totally new, different landscape for you? Or what
You
was
know,
different? Yeah, go
it,
ahead.
very similar. It's tangible. I work with individuals, households. At UW, I have not been working with the corporations and the businesses. It's all been charitable donations, but it's very similar. Maybe there's an extra zero sometimes at the
Yeah.
UW when it pertains to football and capital projects, but it is, I've taken much of the same ways of going about my business and much of the things that Shaney Fink taught me at Seattle U have translated, I think, exceptionally well at UW. I honestly, I think I'm any of the success I may have had at UW. I attribute a lot of that to my experience at Seattle U because it's just such a hustle at a small school like that.
Yeah. Okay. And now we're here. About 2 weeks ago, you were announced as executive director of Dawgs Unleashed, which, Dawgs Unleashed, I love the name. It could mean a lot of things. It could be like a cool movie. It could be like a rap album name, but it is the name of what I saw described as the NIL and influencer marketing unit of the University of Washington Athletics Department. Um, how would you describe this to your mom and dad when they they just saw executive director announced, their son of this unit? Like, what would you describe your job as to your mom and dad, your friends, to your grandparents, to the layperson of the world that doesn't follow sports like maybe some of our listeners do?
I think you have to look at what this team Dogs Unleashed is. And you mentioned the house settlement. So Dogs Unleashed is our sort of proactive reaction to a changing landscape in college athletics. Now, this house settlement has received preliminary approval in a northern federal court in California. If it receives the settlement received formal approval on April 7th, I believe. College athletics will move to a revenue sharing model in fall of 2025. So, meaning for the first time ever, and finally, the NCAA and partner institutions of the NCAA will have the opportunity to share revenues directly with their respective student athletes. So a school like UW will opt in, meaning we can share in fall of 2025 or fall of 2025. And again, this is all if it gets final approval. We may have the opportunity to share. I think the cap will be $20 to $22 million on an annual basis with our student athletes. There will be an escalator with that number. But that's what we're working with in fall of 2025, potentially. So that's one hand, that's rev share. House also covers name, image, and likeness, which as it stands, name, image, and likeness, frankly, is a guise for pay to play. I'm sure we'll talk about our collective Montlake Futures. They have done a phenomenal job of engaging local nonprofits, Boys and Girls Club, Seattle Children's Hospital in the area, to turn what's kind of an odd state of being in college athletics and make it a really good thing for our student athletes and for our community. But where House steps in with NIL is all NIL is going to have to be real from here on out. So there will be the revenue share component. NIL will be supplemental to revenue share, but there is going to be a clearinghouse. I believe Deloitte is going to come in and look at every deal with a monetary value over $600. They're going to look at that critically with a fine-tooth comb and ensure that fair market value is in play. So come to the table, Dawgs Unleashed. This is our thinking that, hey, we're the University of Washington, we're in Seattle, these two, this amazing university that is so inextricably linked to this hustle and bustle and economic power of a city that is full of Husky alumni. We think that we can really effectively serve our student athletes in the name, image, and likeness space. So Dawgs Unleashed is the official, now internal sort of agency for our student athletes in their pursuit of name, image, and likeness compensation. So
Yeah.
AD Pat Chun tapped me to be the executive director, and we'll build out a team. And once we're humming, it'll be like I said, it should be a super effective and meaningful operation.
And you mentioned Montlake Futures, and just to clear up, Montlake Futures is a separate, from what I understand, separate entity, operates, it's its own nonprofit entity, but it's the official collective that works with the University of Washington, and I think it's actually pretty cool. And I don't know if you have any insight if any other universities are doing what Montlake, working with a collective that does what Montlake Futures does, working with like see out these nonprofit organizations throughout. I mean, some people saw like Red Cross is one that comes to mind, and just other like really worthy causes for the community. um are you aware of any other universities? Is it like a super common thing? Because I haven't seen it anywhere else, and I don't know if you're aware.
It's I don't think it's necessarily uncommon, but I do maybe think that Montlake Futures might, yeah, maybe uncommon and exceptional in the way that that is almost the business model is, yeah,
Yeah.
hey, we've got this awesome donor base that has stepped up to support Montlake Futures. We got to get, we're using those funds to pay student athletes. And in order to create that opportunity fairly, we partner with these great nonprofits. So yeah, I
Yeah.
do think it's a little unique the way that Montlake Futures does it. I think it is bode well for them. It's bode well for us. I think as we bring many of these efforts in house, we'll continue to look at nonprofit opportunities because that's just the crux of what UW is.
Yeah. You were, and so I hinted at this before, but you worked in college athletics, and you were a player at one point before NIL. We'll just stick with NIL. I won't even mention the portal. Um, what would you say is like the biggest difference? Maybe we can start from the athlete perspective. So put your shoes in your own shoes before NIL, and then like now after what you're seeing with college athletes these days. What do you think the biggest difference is for these student athletes?
It's a good question, and I think the portal inevitably comes into play.
Yeah.
I think and let's say House gets passed and revenue share is enacted, at least in the Power Four level, or the Group of Four, and the Power FBS. I think everyone will, for the most part, opt into this $20 to $22 million revenue share, and that evens the playing field a little bit. But I mean, what we're seeing right now with some of this NIL stuff is a playing field that is not even, and there's always suitors. And I think I don't fault student athletes in any of this. If there's opportunity to go be compensated, why the heck would you not? And
Yeah.
I think that student athletes have always transferred, and they haven't always had the right to, but as they have, they've always transferred. And maybe we're seeing an uptick in it now because of name, image, and likeness opportunities, and because there really are no regulations on this thing, which
Yeah.
I will say that I do think we need greater regulations in
Yeah.
name, image, and likeness. A lot of that is as we bring it internal. I think we'll see it. but yeah, I think the way NIL has probably changed college athletics the most is you're just seeing more movement among
More
schools.
movement. Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder, and this is a little related, but I always think of like which athletes would benefit from NIL the most, like pre
Mm.
before this all went into effect, and it makes me think of guys like John Brockman, Jimmer Fredette, um, these college stars, like superstars that, didn't end up having. I mean, Brockman had a great NBA career. Fredette was maybe in the NBA for a little bit and then went overseas and had a storied career there. But um, they could have, you know, made a lot of money, right, as college stars. And that leads me to the second point. It's interesting to think that this whole thing has kind of convinced guys to, maybe fringe second round, if we stick with basketball, second round NBA prospects that, could decide to stay for a senior year or fifth year of eligibility. Like they're staying now, right? Because the monetary opportunities are there for them, which is just all great for the school, for the fan base, for everything, right? That these guys stick around and then ultimately they hopefully graduate as well since they're staying around longer. So those are some things that people don't really talk about, or, there's a lot of talk about the movement of bodies and athletes, but people are sticking around if they like it somewhere and, they're being compensated for their name, image, and likeness, then it's all worth it. And I'm sure we're going to see more of that.
Totally. And I will say, name, image, and likeness is in dire need of regulation, and that
Yeah,
seems to be what's coming. I will also say, you look at the 2023 Washington Huskies football season. And you had the transfer portal into that. We got
yeah,
Mike Penix coming in from Indiana.
yeah,
We had Rome Odunze staying a year longer than he likely would have been able to because he would have had to go make money and maximize his earning potential. And we were able to Montlake Futures was able to compensate those guys. And we
yeah,
had this year that had so much, I mean, invaluable community impact. It had measurable economic impact on the area. I mean, it was a glowing example of how that thing works. And like you said, those guys were fifth year seniors, and
yeah,
many of them had been at the UW for 5 years under 2, 3 coaching regimes. It was
yeah.
also an example of loyalty to Montlake, and it was just up and down. Just, I mean, it was the greatest year, and it showed that a lot of this can work when done effectively.
Yeah, yeah. So I read the press release for Dawgs Unleashed announcing it, and there are some things in the press release I just had questions about. So, for example, it said that there's going to be a lot of work done with Sundodger Creative. I have no idea what that is. I think I know what it is, but can you just tell me what is Sundodger Creative?
Yeah, this is a cool component of bringing NIL in house. And I will also just say, Kev, I don't totally understand Sundodger Creative. I share, my office is adjacent to their. We call it the orchard because it's a room full of Apple computers and they're just banging away creatively. And it's all the content that you see from the Husky Athletic. They're in our social media accounts. They set and leverage the brand guidelines. And up until this point, NIL, it's in a sense been church and state. The university, I mean, recently we were able to have some amateurism laws repealed in the state of Washington so that I and our fundraising team, Tahiti, could go fundraise for Montlake Futures and for NIL. But NIL has been an external entity, like you said. So we have not been able to really help our kids leverage the UW brand and UW's ability to put out creative and strategic communications for their name, image, and likeness endeavors. So we will, for the first time, work with Sundodger to help these kids. If they ink a deal, if we're able to help them find a partnership, there are going to be deliverables on the back end, and we can help them create really effective content that they can use in these partnerships. So Sundodger is anytime you see these cool videos on UW social media, anytime you get communications to your email, it all comes from that shop, and we'll be able to leverage the beast that is Sundodger now, which is just going to be such a huge tool for us.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. Uh, the next question I have is about just so we've kind of talked about this, but NIL, um, you work intimately, around it, with it. Um, what would you say is the biggest misunderstanding that the general public, or you maybe read a tweet, or you read something in the press, or you hear it in your everyday with some people that aren't in college athletics? Like, what would you say is maybe not maybe the biggest misunderstanding, or some other misconceptions that people just continue to talk about?
I think this maybe goes hand in hand with NIL and student athletes earning a piece of the pie of this enterprise that is NCAA sports. But I I'm getting a little impatient of hearing the argument, well, they're kids. They're just going to go blow the money because A, they're young adults. And B, if it's their money to earn in a fair marketplace, who the heck are we to tell them what to do with their money? Now,
Hmm.
I think that I say we, the university, we should actually have resources, financial education, financial advisory in house, and we're working on that to make sure that these kids are making sound fiscal decisions. Um, but I think when you look at like a Husky athletics, we on our sports earn about $110 million a year. That's ticketing, parking, seat related gifts at the football stadium and basketball arena, um, hot dogs, merchandising, all the like. And student athletes are finally going to get really their pro rata, a fair share of those earnings.
Yeah.
NIL has been a sort of workaround because 3 years ago it became, hey, these student athletes have the right to make money, but
Yeah.
the NCAA sort of passed the buck and said, we still are not going to pay the student athletes, but they can go out and make money off of their name, image, and
Yeah.
likeness. So I think the biggest misconception to me is a that the kids are getting a scholarship. Isn't that enough? For many student athletes, yes, but for some of these high level football, basketball, other student athletes that bring this real value to the university and to the community, a scholarship just frankly is not near enough. And then B, like I said, the argument that these are kids and they can't handle the money, I just think is frankly unfair. So again,
Yeah.
both of these are, it's really our duty now at the university to make sure that these kids are able to earn in a fair marketplace, are valued appropriately, and that they have the resources to take care of their money and take care of themselves.
Yeah. And I think I mean, you hit on a great point. I mean, college is not just about learning in the classroom. I mean, you use the term student athletes. I mean, they're also learning on the field. Um, but it's crazy to me that uh, that for a long time, and this is all we've known, is that student athletes have not been compensated, have not been paid, have not been receiving sponsorships, and then they go play professionally and they have all this money, right? It's like kind of like the same issue. Like, wouldn't you rather have them exposed to a check and like, here's where this money should go. Here are your options, things like that. I mean, I even experienced that becoming a lawyer. Like, okay, I can blow this money. I can choose to save it. Like, these are all things that you learn. And to criticize, I think that is the weakest argument against, you know, compensating or paying athletes. And I keep on saying compensated because they are truly being compensated, right? Or hopefully that will be the case once the house settlement goes through. But yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think that's just another opportunity for the university and to live out its mission of educating its students. So great
I
points
couldn't agree
there.
more. Yeah,
Yeah.
well said.
All right. So Is there anything else about what we've talked about? Anything else you'd like to add? Maybe I'll end this part of this on this with this question is what are you most excited about? You're 2 weeks into your role, but like what are you pumped up about?
I'm excited to operate in a world where Husky student athletes NCAA wide have an opportunity to make fair money. I'm really excited to be at the forefront of this new representative body for student athletes to go out and make additional earnings. I think
Yeah,
when you think NIL, a lot of people think football, men's and women's basketball, a couple other sports, and that's kind of the way it has operated and maybe will operate. But I see real partnership opportunity in Seattle and beyond to to get scholarship subsidization for some of our non-revenue sports. For
hmm
UW has 22 sports, and I look forward to working with all 22, all 650 of our student athletes, if and when they're interested in finding partnerships, whether it's trade and in-kind deals, cash deals, any partnership that will allow them to receive fair compensation. I think it's such a great opportunity for us to be able to do this in house. So I'm fired up about it.
great. Well, I'm sure some of our listeners are excited about that too. Um, let's end on this. Let's have some fun. Um, you played high school basketball, you played college basketball. Um, who is the best basketball player you've ever faced? And you can take that however you want. Maybe you watched him from the bench and you were there in person. Um, or maybe you were in the game and they dunked on you. Maybe you dunked on them. But who's that player?
Oh man, there's a couple that come to mind. I Tony Roten was a senior at Garfield my junior year at Roosevelt. He was freakish in high school. I mean, he was so quick and so strong. He could shoot, he could pass, he'd drive the lane and dunk on you. I mean, he was just unbelievable. So Tone is up there. Um, Playing AAU my senior year with our buddy Mike Phillips and our buddy Jackson Clough, we were on an Adidas team that actually went and fared pretty well down at this Vegas like Adidas national tournament, and
Yeah.
we made it to God. It might have been the quarters of the semis, and came up on this Dream Vision team from Vegas that had Shabazz Muhammad. And I don't think he amounted to much in the NBA, but my God, he was the best high school basketball player I've ever seen. He was kind of in the same vein as Tone. Like he just was
Yeah.
physically dominated and just didn't belong on the court with us. And I mean, he
Yeah.
had a team around him, but he just mopped the floor with us.
Yeah. He was a lefty. I
Oh,
remember him playing in I was in college and I went down with my friend Woody and we went down to this tournament at Mater Day and they showcased like some of the top teams and Shabazz Muhammad was there. I was like, this guy's legit. I mean, he
he was
looked like a
amazing.
grown man. He had
Yeah.
the kind of like the DJ Fenner, just like he looked like, he was just physically just not where these other like high school boys were. He looked like a man among boys.
Totally. And then the last one I'll say, the one year I played at UW, my senior year was Jalen Brown's freshman year at Cal. And
Oh
they came into
yeah.
head to head. And, it was a Cal team that we thought we'd take care of. And Jalen Brown, being I don't know, maybe he's 18, 19 years old,
Yeah.
he did not belong in college basketball. My gosh. I mean, he had two emphatic dunks, just managed the game. In person, he was so freaking big.
Yeah.
So he was up there too. That was at the
Jalen
time it wasn't
Brown.
fun, but looking back, it was pretty fun. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So here's my next question for you. Um, let's just imagine that, we had to put together an all-time starting five UW basketball team. But here's the kicker. You are taking up, would you have considered yourself more of a power forward or a three, a wing in college?
oh, probably a power forward.
Okay, probably a power forward. Because so like let's say you occupy the four spot. I don't know what type of offense you're running. If you're running kind of a more fast-paced Romar offense, or if you're running something a little slower, I don't know. Maybe it depends on the personnel here. But who fills out your starting five?
So I have to be in this five.
You have to be in the five.
Okay. So if I'm doing this, I'm only gonna consider guys that I watched
Okay.
on the Huskies. So I'm
All
not
right.
like, I'm forgetting Hugh Briggs and
Yeah.
Steve Hawes and Det and Chris Belp and
Okay.
Don Watts and Todd McCulloch. Like those guys are legends, but I never
That's who
watched
you're
them.
going up against.
I
So
never
that
watched them play.
this will
Yeah.
be the scrimmage. All these guys you never watched, they'll be going up against whatever team we're putting together
It's
right
like
now.
when you compare the LeBron era and the
Yeah.
Jordan. Like so,
Yeah.
and then okay, and then on this list, I'm not gonna do any one and done guys. So
Okay.
Murray, Chris, Tony Roten,
Yeah.
Spence Hawes, those guys.
Okay.
Even like a Jalen Noel, like he was a 2 year guy, but I'm thinking of like who are the
Three,
all
4 year.
time Huskies that were there for a while. So okay, so I
Yeah.
got to be at the four. I'm going one IT, Isaiah
Yes.
Thomas.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, two, Brandon Roy. I think he's variable 2, 3, but he
Yeah.
truly, I mean, I think Brandon Roy's like one of the greatest mid range basketball players of all time. Just point
Yes.
blank, period. Uh, three, Quincy Pondexter. My God, he was so much fun to watch as a
Yeah.
Husky. His senior year was like the most fun I think I was a junior in high school. And that was like the most fun I've had watching Husky basketball was his senior year
Yeah.
campaign. So that's three. I'm the four. I'm holding
Which is
this
a
group back.
five.
And then it's Brockness, John Brockman,
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
five.
He's
And
gonna
I
take
feel
your rebounds. You're not gonna get any rebounds from Brogman because he's gonna take them all from you.
he was
Um,
such he I mean, and he wasn't his freshman year Brandon's senior year. So he
yeah.
crossed over with
Yeah.
that group and
Yeah.
then had his own and then Spence was a freshman like his junior year and him and Isaiah together. Yeah, Brock had a fun run with the Huskies and I mean, he's up there for all timers.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brockman shared the cover of Sports Illustrated with my all-time favorite Husky, Ryan Appleby. Ryan Appleby, I think, just he was in the wrong era, right? Because he's a three-point shooter. I sometimes wonder, he would be one of those NIL guys that would have made a killing. Anyways, that's my Ryan Appleby shout out because I love him as a player.
He's the best.
Um,
I have that Sports Illustrated cover hung up at my parents' house.
yeah,
It's the best.
it's a great one. Joe Knight, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time. It was a joy talking college athletics with you. I'm looking forward to seeing everything that Dawgs Unleashed does for the UW's student athletes and so forth. And I'm also excited to watch you continue to do your thing. And we hope we can have you on again in the future. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks, Kev. Yeah, this was a ton of fun and go dog. Look forward to doing it again.